It is 2026, and the world is a far darker place than the one we know. The year is 81 years after the end of the Second World War, a war that ended not with the fall of Berlin, but with the unconditional surrender of the Allies. Germany, under the Nazi regime, achieved total victory. The consequences of that victory have shaped every aspect of global society, from the political map to the daily lives of billions. In this alternate timeline, the Axis powers carved up the world, and the effects remain starkly visible even today. Let us begin in Europe, the heartland of the Thousand-Year Reich. The continent is not a collection of independent nations but a patchwork of occupied territories, puppet states, and Greater Germany itself. The Nazi Empire stretches from the Atlantic coast of France deep into the Russian heartland. The so-called Generalplan Ost was implemented with chilling efficiency. Eastern Europe, including Poland, Ukraine, and the Baltic states, was cleared of its native populations through a combination of genocide, forced displacement, and enslavement. These lands are now settled by ethnic Germans, organized into a network of agricultural and industrial colonies designed to supply the Reich with resources and food. Germany itself has undergone a radical transformation. Berlin, rebuilt as Germania, is a megalopolis of monumental architecture, with the Great Hall at its center, a dome so vast it creates its own microclimate. The city is the administrative hub of the entire Greater European Reich. The population is strictly stratified. At the top are pure-blooded Aryans, followed by Germanized Slavs and other assimilable peoples, then a vast underclass of forced laborers and subjugated races. The Gestapo and the SS have evolved into a permanent surveillance state, with every citizen catalogued and monitored through a national identity system far more intrusive than any modern database. Resistance is virtually non-existent. The last major uprising, the 1964 Warsaw Uprising, was crushed with orbital bombardment from German space stations. Economically, Europe is a centrally planned system that serves the Reich's needs. The continent is self-sufficient in food and energy, thanks to the exploitation of Eastern resources and the development of synthetic fuel technologies. German companies like IG Farben and Siemens have become global monopolies, controlling everything from pharmaceuticals to electronics. The standard of living for ethnic Germans is high, though stagnated by the lack of competition. For the occupied peoples, life is one of hard labor and limited rights. French, Dutch, and Scandinavian populations are allowed some cultural autonomy but with no political power. The Mediterranean is a German lake, with North Africa and the Middle East under the control of Axis allies and puppet regimes, securing oil supplies for the Reich. Technology has advanced, but along a different path. The Nazis, with their ideological biases, suppressed certain fields like theoretical physics and instead focused on rocketry, genetics, and industrial engineering. By the 2020s, Germany has a manned presence on the Moon and Mars, but computing technology is decades behind our timeline. Mechanical and analog systems dominate, with early transistor-based computers only emerging in the last few years. The Internet does not exist as we know it. Instead, a centralized network called the Reichsnetz connects government and military installations, with limited civilian access filtered by the propaganda ministry. Across the Atlantic, North America presents a starkly different picture. The United States, the nation that once stood as the arsenal of democracy, was forced to surrender in 1945 after a series of devastating events. The timeline diverges most sharply in the spring of 1945. Operation Sea Lion, the German invasion of Britain, succeeded in 1941 after the Royal Navy was decimated by U-boat wolf packs and the Luftwaffe gained air superiority. Britain fell, and the British government fled to Canada. With the fall of Britain, the Soviet Union was crushed in a two-front war, with German forces pushing to the Urals and Japanese forces advancing from the east. By 1944, the only remaining Allied power was the United States, facing a two-ocean war with a battle-hardened Wehrmacht in Europe and an expansionist Japan in the Pacific. Then came the atomic bomb, but in this timeline, the first nuclear weapon was developed by Germany. In 1944, the Heereswaffenamt successfully tested a uranium fission device. By early 1945, German long-range bombers, flying from bases in Norway, delivered a nuclear strike on Washington, D.C. The devastation of the capital, along with simultaneous attacks on New York and Chicago, broke American morale. With the government in chaos and no hope of defeating the German Navy and Luftwaffe, President Truman signed an armistice. The terms were harsh. The United States was forced to disarm, cede control of the Atlantic and Pacific to the Axis, and accept a Nazi-friendly government. President Truman and many other leaders were executed for crimes against peace. Thus began the period known as the American Fortress, or the Occupied States. The mainland United States was never fully invaded, but it was subjected to constant surveillance and economic domination. The German Secret Service, the SD, infiltrated every level of American society. Local collaborators formed the American National Socialist Party, which after a few decades became the only legal political entity. The Constitution was suspended, the Bill of Rights was abolished. The country became a satellite state, supplying raw materials and agricultural products to Europe in exchange for manufactured goods. Deindustrialization was deliberate. German policy forbade the U.S. from developing high-tech industries like aviation and electronics. The once mighty industrial heartland of the Midwest declined into a rural backwater. Culturally, America was forced to adopt a Hitlerite worldview. Education emphasized racial purity and loyalty to the Reich. Jazz, rock and roll, and later, African American culture were suppressed as degenerate. Hollywood was purged, and the film industry became a tool for propaganda. Yet, resistance never fully died. Underground movements, often led by former soldiers and intellectuals, operated from the Rocky Mountains and Appalachians. They maintain hope for liberation, but without external support, they remain a nuisance rather than a threat. Mexico and South America fared differently. The Monroe Doctrine was dead. After the U.S. defeat, Germany and its Axis allies extended influence southward. Argentina, under a pro-Nazi regime, became a junior partner, while Brazil was divided into spheres of influence. The Panama Canal is jointly controlled by Germany and Japan. Throughout Latin America, resources like oil, copper, and rubber are extracted by German corporations, with local populations treated as colonial subjects. Poverty is rampant, and political dissent is crushed. In the 1960s, an attempt to form a unified resistance movement, the Pan American Liberation Front, was destroyed by SS Einsatzgruppen flown in from Europe. Japan, as the other main Axis power, also emerged victorious. The Pacific War ended with the destruction of the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor in a more decisive attack in 1941, followed by the capture of Midway and Hawaii. Without the U.S. industrial mobilization, Japan was able to consolidate its Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. The Japanese Empire stretches from the Aleutians to Indonesia, from the coast of China to the shores of Australia. India, liberated from British rule, was partitioned under Japanese supervision into client states. The Raj became the Indian National Army, a puppet regime. China? The Chinese resistance under Chiang Kai-shek was eventually crushed. The nationalists fled to Taiwan, but Japan invaded Taiwan in 1948. Mao's communists, initially seen as allies, were betrayed. The Chinese people were subjected to the same brutality as Europe, with forced labor and biological experimentation. The Japanese emperor is considered a divine figurehead, while the military government, the Tojo clique's successors, rules with an iron fist. The Pacific is entirely controlled by the Imperial Navy. No Allied fleet has sailed its waters since 1945. Germany and Japan divided the world into spheres of influence along a rough line through the Indian Ocean. The Middle East is a point of tension. Germany controls the Suez Canal and the oil fields of Iraq and Iran, while Japan dominates the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia. Neither side trusts the other. There have been several proxy conflicts in the Hindu Kush and the islands of the Indian Ocean. An uneasy peace exists, maintained by the threat of mutual assured destruction. Both powers have nuclear weapons, and a large arsenal of chemical and biological weapons as well. Space is militarized. Both Germany and Japan have orbital weapons platforms capable of striking any point on Earth within minutes. The state of humanity in this timeline is one of stagnation and oppression. Technological progress is stunted by ideology and the lack of open competition. The majority of people live in poverty and fear, with no hope of change. The world is divided into colossal empires that tolerate no dissent. Education, science, and culture are tightly controlled. The only positive note is that due to the global Nazi domination, environmental regulations were never a priority. By 2026, the world is reeling from climate change that has accelerated due to unrestricted industrial exploitation. Coastal cities like New York, London, and Shanghai, damaged by war and neglect, are partially submerged. Yet the rulers in Germania and Tokyo show little concern. Is there any hope? Secret alliances between resistance cells in the Americas, Europe, and Asia are rumored to exist, funded by a hidden faction within the German aristocracy that sees the folly of the regime. But as of 2026, the swastika still flies over the Reichstag, and the land of the rising sun casts a long shadow over the Pacific. The world waits for a spark that might ignite a new war or a new dawn.